Hello. Welcome to Isbw Writing, the podcast for wannabe fiction writers. I'm your host, Mer Lafferty, and I am currently coming to you live from Boston. Except I'm not live. I'm live. You're listening to it recorded. But I'm at Boskone right now. The con hasn't started yet. I'm up in my room writing, and I also have my digital recorder, so I figured, hey, let's record. Last time I recorded, I told you that I was going to be doing some changes, going to be trying to do some themes. So we're going to start with theme 1, starting a new book. Now, this is just me. Your mileage may vary. I'm just telling you, as always, what works for me. I'm pointing this out because so many people say this is how you should do a thing, or this is how you shouldn't do a thing. And really, so long as, you're not plagiarizing and you're still writing, then, if it works for you, great. So yeah, I started a new book. I am, how many words into it? 6,591 words. Not bad. I feel good about this. One thing that's funny is people so much, they ask you, how long does it take you to write a book? And I never know how to answer that because oftentimes a book will, you'll get this idea. And you'll think, that's kind of a cool idea. And usually you're doing something else at the time, so the idea just sits in the back of your head. And you think, maybe next maybe your idea will be a person in a situation. Maybe your idea will be a situation itself with no people in it. Maybe your idea will be this awesome setting. Maybe you'll think of the conflict first. Ooh, someone dies. That's a pretty lame start. It's not lame, it's bland. But, someone dies falling off a building. Someone dies falling off a very specific building at a very specific time of day. Whatever. You get an idea. And so, as you think about it, it starts to build. You add a person, you add a conflict, you add a setting. This could take months. You don't know. For me, it did. I can't even tell you when I had this first idea. It's another murder mystery. And I know I got the idea while my husband and I were watching a lot of Midsummer Murders a couple of months ago. I was trying to sell another book. And that book didn't sell, but then I started working on this one. For me, I wanted it to be science fiction, so I had to take the murder mystery idea and see how I could put it into a science fiction setting. And that took a little while because I didn't want to just cram it in there. I wanted it to be a reasonable decision. So essentially I had a person in a situation, but I didn't have a personality. I didn't know who this person was. And I think that's one of my, I wouldn't say weak spots, because once I get the voice of who I'm trying to write, it's easy. But it takes me a long time to really get a sense of who my characters are. Some people have their characters talk in their heads. I can't get this character out of my head. I think it sounds magical and it sounds maddening, for sure. But it's not how my brain works. I kind of wish I had that. I had a friend who said she couldn't rest until she got this character out of her head. She told her character's story. And at that point, because I was comparing myself to every other person writing everywhere, anywhere, I thought, oh gosh, well, I must not be a good writer then because my characters don't talk to me. But whatever. I now have my main character's personality. I don't have my secondary character personality. I do have my antagonist. Now, for a murder mystery, it's interesting, the things I've been learning, which is every single main person in your book needs to have the means and the motive to do the murder. That's one of the hugest challenges. Let's take a television show. Let's take Midsummer Murders. You know that Barnaby's family is not going to be, that doesn't apply because they're in every episode. But, almost everybody else he comes across is going to be a suspect. Even if it's the distraught person who brings the murder to him. I mean, that's a possibility. Everybody's a possibility. Everybody could have done it. And if you don't do that, then you've got a weakness somewhere. So you need to make sure that everybody has a reason and the ability to kill. And that took a while to build up those building blocks, I should say. I will tell you one person I have in my book. Ursula K. Le Guin wrote an essay about Mrs. Brown in science fiction and how little old ladies, prim little old ladies who have lived in poverty and have a very set way, they're basically the real everyman. It's like the everyman we think of actually has the ability to rise to the occasion and do whatever action or exciting thing needs to be done. And, if you put an older person in there who's set in their ways and possibly without very many resources to their disposal, that is the everyman. And she's like, Mrs. Brown does not show up in science fiction. So, of course, my first thought was, I want to put Mrs. Brown in science fiction. So I've got a space station, and I've got a prim little old lady who goes there. And I was actually asking my daughter, okay, why does Mrs. Brown go to a space station? Why does she take such an exciting move? Because humans visiting the space station is a new thing. And my brilliant daughter said, she won a contest. And that reminded me of my grandmother. Because my grandmother apparently entered every single radio contest she could when my mom was growing up. The challenge was, grab your breakfast dishes and bring them into the studio. And she grabbed the corners of the tablecloth and pulled all the breakfast dishes into the tablecloth and ran down to the studio. At one point, she won a live turkey. I've told this story a couple of times, I think. Look back at the Ditch Diggers episodes. I think it might have been the first Ditch Digger with Cameron Hurley on it, because I find Cameron Hurley's grandmother and my grandmother, well, their differences really are a good indicator of the differences between me and Cameron. Her grandmother found a Nazi boot with a foot still in it in France, and knew that if she was found with the foot, her family would be killed. And she decided to throw the foot into the river. My grandmother won a live turkey from a radio giveaway. Put it in the trunk of her car and drove home and opened the car, and the turkey ran off. And my grandmother ran after it, screaming. One of us grew up to be a lot tougher than the other one. I'll let you make the jump. So yeah, I wanted to put Mrs. Brown, a little bit of my grandmother into it. Less of the screaming down the road, chasing a live turkey, but more of the, I will enter any contest that catches my fancy. And because you don't waste anything, she will take whatever she wins. She wins a trip to a space station, she's going to take it. What's her motive to be the murderer? Well, I'm not going to tell you that. You have to read the book. But sometimes you come up with you want somebody to do something, and you have to come up with the reason. And sometimes you take the reason and you follow it organically. But sometimes people don't like that organic thing. I think people didn't like the sort of semi-love story in the Shambling Guides, because I took what I thought were the logical steps in that relationship, because both people were humans and they were so personally tied to the underworld of the truth of monsters living in the city, and their issues did not really cross paths. Essentially, each was the star of their own story and didn't want to be a supporting character for the other one. So they broke up. And this was one of those things where the reasons drove the actions, and so... But that doesn't always work with fiction, because sometimes everybody doesn't want the realism. This is why rom-coms are successful, and why you know that rom-coms don't actually happen in real life. But I digress. The thing is, sometimes if you want your story to go in a certain way, you can think of a reason. And if you can't think of a reason, you need to find a different way. I'm not saying always jam it in place. Jam your reasons in place. So I have come up with a number of characters. And when I started to write, that's when I started to I haven't grabbed the voice yet of one of the characters. And he's a point of view character, so he's a little tough. I want to talk about pacing. I'm reading a book right now, and I'm trying to do I'm not enjoying this, but I'm learning from it because I'm learning what not to do. I won't tell you the book because I'm not going to trash anybody's book on my podcast, but it's a book where the pacing's all off. I know that it is primarily a Western trope, but we expect the hero's journey. I don't care if you dislike the fact that it's a trope or dislike the fact that I have to follow these rules. I'm going to go off on my own direction. The hero's journey works. The hero's journey sells books and movies. And we actually had a character see what she was up against and literally turn around and go home. Drove the story to a complete screeching halt as the person went home and kind of licked her wounds and tried to get on with her normal life. And I'm thinking, why am I still reading this? I don't care. I don't care about this woman and her, going through old papers. I want to know what happens next in the exciting parts. And it's one of those things that you don't, if you feel confident doing it, you don't actually realize that it's hard until you see somebody else struggle with it and you're thinking, oh, how do I do that in fact? And I remember a lecture I went to at Stone Coast where someone was talking about the proper way to pace conflict. And they were referencing a story about somebody had been dumped in a well and they were trying to climb up. I am boiling this down. The language of the scene was actually quite full of tension and awesomeness. But essentially the scene was she climbed up, she slid back, she got a little further, she slid back, it hurt, she climbed a little further. So it's an aspect of 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. But you're always intending to move forward. You've got to have a couple of wins to keep people positive, but there have to be some losses to keep the tension up. Take Star Wars. Luke loses his aunt and uncle. That's a big step backwards. And then they find passage to Alderaan in the Millennium Falcon. So that's a step forward. They get to Alderaan and it's exploded. That's a step backwards. They go to the Death Star. That's a step forward. All sorts of bad stuff happens on the Death Star, step backwards, but they get off the Death Star. Okay. That's a step forward. The Death Star follows them, etc. You can't have everything be a failure or everything be a success. That's why your book is made up of little conflicts. You've got your main conflict. There's a murder. My hero has to solve it. But there's the conflict of the different people being aboard the space station, which is a new place to them, being among aliens, which is a new thing, being among the interhuman conflicts, because these people ain't all going to get along. It's a lot of moving parts, but it's moving parts that people will enjoy if you get it all right. And people forgive a lot of stuff if you keep them interested in your basic story. From what I understand, Twilight was so successful because, what's-her-face, Stephanie something, Meyer, managed to properly, accurately write down how it felt to be a teenager and in love. And write it down so accurately that people felt it again, which is why so many older women were in love with the book, because it reminded them of how they felt. So those are all the little beginning things that I need to think about. I have not started this story cold. I actually did run through an outline a couple of times. I worked out every character, their basic archetype. I endorse the book 45 Master Characters frequently. I love this book. And I work out their archetype, and I work out how they react to each other. And, it's not these two people are friends. It's this person sees this person as somebody they can learn from and somebody they respect, while person B looks at them like, you're a screw-up and you'll never amount to anything, so why are you bothering me? There are a lot of note cards. I'm actually upset I didn't bring my note cards with me on this trip, but I can always edit. Once I get the information down of the scene, I can edit the dialogue and the actions to fit the character a little bit better on second draft. I started with a basic idea of a murder, and then from that came up with the characters and the setting and the conflicts involved. And I did that before I started writing anything, which is really hard for me. I love writing by the seat of my pants, but that's hard to do with mysteries. I heard Agatha Christie didn't actually know who the murderers were in her books, until, most of her books anyway, until the end. She just made sure to give every single person a means and a motive. And, I was reading Murder Under the Sun Evil Under the Sun, excuse me. And there was, one character who didn't actually, I don't think he had a lot of motive, but there was a point when the murder happened when he was, he got up and left and went off by himself, like went back to the hotel to get something for his wife. And I noticed that. I'm like, wait a minute. Why did he go back there? I bet he's the murderer. And I was wrong. But Agatha Christie was just giving me a clue, pointing me in a direction, thinking to make sure that I thought this guy could have done it. So I don't even know if this podcast has any advice. I'm just going over what I've been working on. Worked on a lot of pre-writing stuff, which possibly is why the writing's going so well. Once I finally started on it, I was chugging along 2,000 and 3,000 words at a time. I've only been working, this is my fourth day writing? Third or fourth day. I haven't been writing straight on. I did a couple of days and then a couple of days off. And so I know I did 1,000 words today. I might do some more after I'm done here. I also might get some lunch. Who knows? But that's what I did to get started. I juggled all of those things and tried to see how they could fit together, and I think I'm pretty happy with it. So next stop is writing it. My next podcast, I'll probably be talking about the issues I come up against. And hopefully I'll be able to share, more information about the book itself. But for now, I'm just writing a book. To find out more about me, go to murverse.com. If you want to email me, mightymur@gmail.com. And to support the Patreon, which supports both Ditch Diggers and I Should Be Writing, it's patreon.com/mightymur. Check out my other podcast, Ditch Diggers, the science fiction magazine I co-edit, Escape Pod, and my books. You can get I Should Be Writing, the companion book to this podcast. You can get my many award-nominated science fiction book, 6 Wakes, also a murder mystery. And you can get the novelization for Solo, available in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook now, and available in softcover, also known as paperback, by the kids, in the end of April. And I think that's all the shilling I have. Until next time, you should be writing. Remember, you can support the show at patreon.com/mightymur. I Should Be Writing theme music provided by John Anelio. You can find more about him at johnanelio.com. This podcast is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license.